God's country at the gateway to the Ozarks in Fairfield Bay, Arkansas. This is the Fairfield Bay Gadfly coming to you from the Flytrap Studio with the Fairfield Bay Gadfly Presents. Today, we will look at this day in history, uncover what is going on in the world, and reflect on how such happenings affect all of us. Now, this day in history. On April 9th, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee and Federal General Ulysses S. Grant met at Appomattox Courthouse in the William McLean House to negotiate the end of the war between the states. You will recall that there were no committees or peace talks, just two of the greatest military generals in American history sitting down and coming up with an end to the hostilities. Don't you wish the same thing could happen in today's world? God save the South. Now, internationally, the body counts of innocent civilians in Ukraine continue to mount each day. As Marlon Brando's character Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now states, the horror. That is what the evening news, just like in Vietnam and every conflict since then, is bringing to you each day. The horror of war. Now, what is happening to mitigate the horror? Honestly, not much of nothing. Slow Joe has initiated some sanctions through executive order that sound good, but are they actually working? What about Europe's deadly reliance on Russian oil and gas production? Biden seemed to revel when he calls the value of the Russian ruble as quote-unquote rubble. However, the reality of the matter is that the ruble has rebounded. Initially, the ruble sunk to a record low of 121.5 rubles per dollar on the announcement of various sanctions by Western countries upon Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Since then, Europe is either unable and or unwilling to end their reliance on the teat of Russian oil and gas, and Russia's insistence on requiring payment for such resources in rubles. As of this past Thursday, April 7th, the exchange rate of rubles to US dollars stood at 75.75 rubles for $1 US, which is what the exchange rate was before the Ukrainian invasion. Now, a couple of days later, the rate stands at 80.25 rubles per $1 US. In other words, most all of the US and European sanctions are toothless. If Vlad the Impaler Putin keeps the folks at home happy by continuing a favorable exchange rate, which many Russians keep up with more so than Americans, then most Russian citizens don't care what happens in Ukraine. Granted, Russia is attempting to pay their international bond debt with rubles, but such is just window dressing, as most such payments require payments in US dollars. So much possible bond default could possibly end up in some international court, with Russia stating they did pay their debts. So it completely muddles up the international monetary markets. Besides Europe, we must remember that China and the Middle East also provide needed support to Russia. The international community must pursue more severe sanctions against Russia in the coming days. Something more than seizing a yacht or two, or maybe even a mansion, oh boy. Meanwhile, citizens of the world are sitting back aghast at the ongoing genocide in Ukraine. I'll give the U.S. credit for supplying a fair amount of military weapons and humanitarian aid, but U.S. and NATO must increase their commitment to stopping further Russian atrocities by supplying fighter aircraft and other major equipment to Ukraine. A war of attrition such as Ukraine can last for years. But the major downside is innocent civilians are the ones suffering and dying. We are daily seeing the horror. It is time to stop it. On a national basis, of great interest is the acquittal of 2 of the 4 defendants in the alleged abduction plot of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, along with a possible mistrial of the remaining 2 defendants. If you take a look at the case, particularly after the jury failed to return any verdicts after the first day or so of deliberations, you can see how easily your average everyday Joe can be quote-unquote groomed to say incriminating statements. I know my ears perked up when the jury remained under deliberations. That told me that somehow the federal prosecutors completely screwed up the case. As I've read more, the more I see entrapment of the defendants. Granted, these might not be the guys you invite to the Thanksgiving dinner, but they have rights just like the rest of us. Speaking of the law, the appointment of the quota of 1 black woman to the U.S. Supreme Court happened the other day, and the liberal media and cheerleaders were awash in the alleged importance of such an appointment. Almost every day, the mainstream media attempts to remove Justice Clarence Thomas from hearing cases while going after his conservative wife. Black jurists, apparently, are okay when they express liberal sentiments. However, according to such media, a black person should not profess conservative views and values. If you ask me, such logic is racist at best and is an attempt to destroy the America we love. Now, on to the state of Arkansas. The Clinton Presidential Park has added 26 sculpted, quote-unquote, cool globes for their art exhibit named Cool Globes, Hot Ideas for a Cooler Planet. Remember when we were afraid the planet was going to freeze? Well, guess what? In other words, simplistic representation of the questionable global warming theory. I will give the Democrats credit for the dumbing down of the U.S. electorate. They do it better than anyone else. The continuing rape of Pulaski County Public Schools through the endless desegregation lawsuit continues to suck much-needed public education funds into legal fees for the unending litigation. Then people wonder why there is such a quote-unquote white flight from Little Rock and Pulaski County schools. It's all about race for legal fees, and the actual students are the ones being left out. I would challenge my listeners from Pulaski County to review their personal property tax bill from year to year to see how much the tax increases for public schools affect them each year. Finally, for the state, there are no new COVID deaths for the second time in the last 2 weeks. In further encouragement, the state's new cases reached their lowest point of the year. Perhaps now there are more seasonal flu cases, formerly known as the COVID virus. Now, locally, well. Throw the bag of popcorn into the microwave, pop a top of a cold one, and sit back and watch the dueling governments of the Fairfield Bay City and the Fairfield Bay Community Club concerning short-term rentals. Apparently, the city has now said their short-term rental ordinance supersedes the short-term rental provisions of the club bylaws and covenants and restrictions. This should get interesting. I guess this falls into the category of the mice that roared, not the mouse that roared. I remember that 1983 song from the band Reflex, The Politics of Dancing. And I can hear the politics of short-term rentals. The final outcome should be interesting, but think about the possibility of the city later on saying, hey, we made a mistake promulgating the ordinance to begin with, and now we're repealing it. I personally spoke with a leader of Hot Springs Village and was told that persons within the village are of the opinion that short-term rental laws are unconstitutional. Thus, they do not have any at Hot Springs Village. Then there's the big but, quote unquote, that the city of Hot Springs has a rather onerous short-term rental ordinance, very similar to the one in Fairfield, Arkansas, which was the blueprint used by the Fairfield Bay City Council. I know there has also been some discussion by the Garland County Quorum Court about such an ordinance for the county itself, which would include Hot Springs Village. Short-term rental ordinances are truly just additional taxes foisted on the citizens of communities which buy into the quote-unquote protecting property values argument. There are enough criminal laws on the books of all cities to handle any possible miscreants who turn short-term rentals into wild party houses. In other words, the laws to stop inappropriate activities by persons who use short-term rentals already exist. It's up to local municipalities to enforce the laws to ensure the civility of the neighborhood. Short-term rental ordinances pit citizens against citizens, neighbors against neighbors, and go against the American way of life. As final note, both city and community club elections for the council and the board of directors are coming up in the near future, with the club elections closest to us at this point. Please, 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 if you are a member of the community club, vote. If you are a citizen of the city, vote. This year's elections are some of the most important each of us has ever faced in Fairfield Bay. If you don't know about the candidates, ask. There are enough people in the Bay that know the inside and outside of all candidates and the challenges being faced by our community. Each of your voices count. Please use the power of the ballot box to express your desires. You can make a difference for today and tomorrow. Finally, I'm going to stray a bit from my normal format today to tell you a story. Today, a U.S. Marine died. In the early morning hours, a Marine veteran died. There were no gunshots, no screaming rockets or mortars, nothing out of the ordinary other than this Marine had the misfortune to be stationed at Camp Lejeune between the time period of August 1953 and December 1987. It seems as though there was extensive contamination of the groundwater at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and the Marine Corps Air Station at New River, North Carolina. It's a story very similar to what those of us who have experienced through our exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. Each day I wake up and take almost as many pills as my dear father took up until he went on hospice at age 91. Myself and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of my comrades from Vietnam daily live with the ravages of Agent Orange as a result of our service to our country. This Marine veteran was no different than veterans of my generation. As a volunteer, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs accredited claims agent and veteran service officer for VFW Post 4513, I will continue on to file a dependency indemnity claim for the Marine's spouse. I made that promise directly to the Marine and their spouse before the Marine's passing. Know that veterans survive the challenges during our service, but that doesn't always mean the exposure we were subjected to can't return in the December years of our lives. I encourage all Marine veterans who possibly were exposed at either of the Marine Corps bases to educate yourself and make sure you are not eligible for medical care or compensation. Remember, today a Marine died. Semper Fi, Marine. Thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in today. This is the Fairfield Bay Gadfly, bringing you truth from above and signing off for now.